Question for you. Is it better to be an optimist or a pessimist? And can you choose? Hey philosophers, I'm Jonas, and this is Philosophy Friday, where we ask interesting questions as a community. Be sure to stick around to hear the question for next week so you can be part of the conversation. Also, we're a brand new channel and we're giving away swag. Stay till the end of the video for details. Today's question, do you have a choice between being an optimist or a pessimist? And which is better? If you look at media and society, I think it's safe to say there's a strong preference for optimists. Most of the time we want to avoid discomfort associated with negative thinking. But does that mean being an optimist is better? We've all heard the refrain, I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist. So, do pessimists have the upper hand when it comes to understanding reality? Is there an advantage to expecting the worst? Now, call me an optimist, but I bet you liked and subscribed, didn't you? Well, we'll see. Let's hear some thoughts from our community. When asked this question, D.O. Baldwin writes on Threads, Stockdale paradox, optimists die first. I like to think that I am a realist. I turn from pessimism at the first smell, and I try not to be overly optimistic. Can you choose? Yes, life is a choice. Thanks for sharing that. The Stockdale paradox is new to me, and I find it intriguing, inspiring, and somewhat confusing. Stockdale himself said he was a philosopher, so that makes sense. This phenomenon is named after Admiral James Stockdale, who was shot down in Vietnam and held captive for 7 years as a prisoner of war. He was regularly tortured and abused, and when asked how he endured, he responded that he could never afford to lose the faith that he would prevail in the end. Okay, so optimism kept him alive. However, when asked who didn't survive, he responded that it was the optimists who didn't make it. Huh? He clarified that the so-called optimists were certain that they would be out by Christmas, and when they were still captives, then surely they'd be out by Easter, and so forth and so on. He says they tormented themselves with hope. Now, I obviously wasn't there, and there's a lot of context that I'm unable to get, but personally, I would still classify both groups as optimists, but with a key difference. I could be wrong, but it sounds like the group that died in camp eventually lost hope because they were unwilling to acknowledge their current realities and their faith was misplaced. Whereas the other group were still optimistic, but consciously acknowledged that they were in an awful situation and there was no telling when they would be freed. So it sounds like Stockdale believed that too much optimism will get you into trouble. Or perhaps that you should be optimistic, but acknowledge that there are limits to what you can realistically expect. To be honest, I still find it a bit confusing. I guess that's why they call it a paradox. As for D.O. Baldwin's line, life is a choice, that seems to be an oversimplification, but we'll discuss free will in a future episode. This comment on the Stockdale paradox reminds me of a comment made by Cindy Baldwin Books on Threads. I think this is an overly reductive framing. As somebody with serious health issues, I spend a lot of time thinking about this. I consider myself an optimistic realist. I think it's important to cultivate hope for the future, but also be realistic about the amount of pain you might experience. I tend to feel that thinking things are going to get better, but I don't know when, and I might experience a good amount of suffering before then, is more effective. MKB Giles writes, hands down, I choose to be an optimist. Our thoughts become our actions, and our mood creates our zeal for life. PyRobot314 writes, I think it feels good to be overly optimistic about life. People will find my rose-colored enthusiasm annoying, but I enjoy being content. That's not to say that there aren't massive problems that need to be dealt with in the world, and we should be working on fixing those problems. But I think we also need to recognize the things we do have in life. Content for ourselves, outrage at injustice for others. I think I like that. Optimism by default, but there are some situations that are naturally different. Kitty Fox says, I feel it's better to be a pessimist, so that you are prepared for anything. Plus, ultimately, you might lead a happier life. With all the seemingly serendipitous things happening, I try to be a pessimist, but I can't help hoping for the best sometimes. Russ R. writes, I think I'm an optimist, but there are times when I'm not. I'm not sure you can paint one as better or the other, since they both have traits that can be beneficial. Example, optimists can be happy when lemons are thrown in their path because they realize it happens and they will adjust as they have adjusted before. Pessimists are usually good at worst-case planning, so when lemons hit their path, they already have a plan to use and realize that it's not as bad as they had planned. The negative side is that an optimist may struggle to make a new plan if they wallow in the didn't go as planned phase, and the pessimist could forever be stuck in worst-case scenario planning and not live their lives. That's very true. I think that both types are important, and I kind of wonder what would happen if there were only optimists or only pessimists in our world. Jared R. writes, I think it might be better to be an optimist. I think because it will naturally lead you to looking for the best in people you interact with. He goes on to say, I don't think you can choose whether or not to be an optimist or pessimist, but I do think you can resist giving into the natural tendencies of either being one or the other. The mother responds to Jared and writes, I agree that you come with a predisposition and that you can choose to lean in or out. I think I'm optimistic about some things, but pessimistic about others. Thank you all for your well thought out answers. So what do I think? Optimism or pessimism? Well, obviously this is a false dichotomy, but if I had to choose one or the other, I'd love to say that I choose optimism, but it would have to depend on the situation. I'd love to think that everything will work out, but wishful thinking has gotten me into trouble in the past, and I may be a bit jaded as a result. Further, simply having a feeling that something will work out isn't going to help you out that much. Luck requires action. You have to do something if you want to affect the outcome. I like how Russ from earlier puts it, pessimists have a plan. And what if you can't act on the plan? Well, if the plan falls apart or I can't formulate a plan at all, I still sometimes feel it's protective to assume that bad things will happen or that things won't live up to my expectations, because otherwise I'll be disappointed when things don't go my way. And while I try not to fall victim to a slippery slope fallacy and assume that one bad thing means everything from now on until the end of time will also be bad for me, I'm more of a pessimist than I'd like to admit. It's not that I'm trying to be a downer, I'm just trying to keep myself from getting hurt. I'm optimistic that that's a good way to think about it. And what about choice? Well, while there are certainly elements of choice in my decision-making process, there's also a bit of reaction to things that have happened in the past, and I don't know that my choice is completely within my control. How's that for a cagey answer? We're all prediction machines. We're full of experiences that have taught us what to expect from the world, and it would be foolish for us to assume that the dice will roll a 2 when it's much more likely to roll a 7. I guess what I'm saying is, I think whether we are optimists or pessimists usually comes down to our life experiences. Have things worked out or gotten worse for you? By no means am I advising anyone to be a pessimist, but I'm also not advising you to be optimistic. We all know people who have had a rough life, and they kind of deserve their worldview. As was said earlier, there are advantages to both, and what works for you is something that only you can know. Am I embarrassed to say I'm often more pessimistic than I think others want me to be? Well, yeah, but I also don't think I should be ashamed. The shame just comes naturally. So what do you think? Which is better between optimism and pessimism? And do you have a choice in which view you espouse? Comment your thoughts. While you're there, you can post your answer to next week's question. Is it possible for one person to appreciably change the world? And if so, what requirements for the person or their community or the environment are there? Add your answers to the pinned comment below, and you might be featured on next week's video. I hope you'll join our conversation and tell us what you think. People like you make these videos possible, and the best way to keep this community going is by joining the discussion in the comments. Again, next week's question is, can one person really cause substantial change in the world? And if so, how? I can't wait to hear your answers. Thanks for watching, and keep questioning. I wanted to take a moment and show you some of the awesome swag we have for Philosophy Friday. There are polo shirts like this one, hoodies, mugs, notebooks, and t-shirts like this one. I absolutely love this t-shirt of Socrates on a half pipe. You can see all the awesome swag that Philosophy Friday has available. Just click on the link to the store at philosophyfriday.com. Also, to celebrate the launch of Philosophy Friday, we're giving out free memberships where you can get discounts and free swag. So you can get yourself the same t-shirt for free if you win. To enter, subscribe and fill out the form. There's a link in the description. And comment on videos. You'll be entering into a drawing to win one of 15 different Philosophy Friday memberships worth up to $300. The earlier you enter, the more chances you have to win. Winners will be announced on the channel and via email. See the rules and the form to fill out in the description.